Thank you very much. I'm sorry, should I address you Toastmasters and okay.
Any way you want.
Any way I want, okay. Welcome. Well, I'd love to spend just a few moments with you here about a subject that I hold near and dear, and that's called histamine. But you know, in every place that I talk, I use the word histamine, and so many people don't even know what the term is. So, anybody here heard that term histamine before? Aha, good, okay, so plenty. Now, a lot of people have heard the term antihistamine, okay? So they're pretty familiar with that. And particularly like the dear lady back here with the bad cough, right? She could probably use one of those right now. But in any regard, histamine is something that most people don't think of. They hear of other things like neurotransmitters, like serotonin and dopamine. They hear other chemicals, hormones. And the interesting thing about it is that histamine is all of those. It's a neurotransmitter. It's a hormone. It does lots of different things. But it's probably the most under-known or talked about chemical we have in our body. So let's just talk about it just a little bit. Why should you care? Well, because each one of us are affected by histamine levels in our body. Okay? Case in point, we had a lovely dinner this evening with the sashimi or sushi. But you know, the problem is that raw fish is loaded with histamine. And there's lots of other foods that are loaded with histamine. Wheat is loaded with histamine. Soy is loaded with histamine. You know, there's tomatoes are loaded with histamine. Anybody like red wine at all here? I saw somebody over here. Yeah, red wine, loaded with histamine. So the great American diet is actually full of histamine. Now, fortunately, our creator, or you know, whoever you decided brought us into existence, but our creator put a little enzyme in our stomach. See, histamine is also not only in the foods that we eat, but it's also in our stomach. It's produced in our stomach by our body. And the reason for that is that as digestion goes through the process, your body has to open up parts of the small intestine to allow for absorption of food into the general circulation. What does that is histamine. Okay? It's just like when you get a cough or you get a sniffle, what it's doing is actually opening up the mucous membranes of the body, opening them up and allowing the healing process to take place. It actually is initiating the first part of healing. But going back to the normal function. So the normal function is stomach. It's produced in the stomach, and it's regulated by an enzyme called DAO, diamine oxidase. You don't have to remember any of this, by the way. Okay, so there's no questions at the end. I mean, there's no quiz at the end. Thank you. So, diamine oxidase. And what happens is that regulates the amount of histamine in your body. Now, the problem is that with the Great American Diet, we're loading our body up with histamine. Okay, so it's constantly got to be produced. But the problem is that, to throw a wild card into this whole thing, people have these things called food sensitivities, or allergies, if you will. Okay? And what happens is that when that goes up, instead of producing the normal amount of histamine, your body kicks out 10, 100 times more histamine. So you've got all of this histamine in your body. Well, it's got to go somewhere, all right? So it can't be regulated anymore, so your body has to then break it down by the liver. And the liver breaks it down, and they can disperse it for a certain period of time, but after a while, it gets too full of this histamine. And so it's got to shunt it to somewhere else. And so where does it put it? Well, it shunts it into little cells called mast cells that line your sinuses, line your gut. Okay? Now the problem is that when you're exposed to something like an environmental allergen, okay, so like a pollen or something along that, if you have like a normal amount of histamine in your body, you don't react to it. But the problem is that because, you know, people are constantly being bombarded by environmental allergens, pollens, grasses, you know, odors, all kinds of things. And so what happens is that your body reacts to it now, but it reacts to it like, instead of just a little bit of a reaction, now you've got like an atomic bomb reaction. And you develop things like this. Okay? So a lot of that coughing that you've got going on is really related to histamine. Because histamine acts as an irritant. Okay? I mean, it's a good thing we have it because it initiates the process of healing. But it acts as an irritant to the system. And so when you've got a cough like that, what that is that's a lot of histamine down here in your bronchus, okay, that your body's trying to get rid of.
Yes.
All right. So what do you do about that? Well, here's another problem. Another problem is that histamine actually will affect your brain. What about that? Well, what it does is the number one thing it does is it keeps you awake.
Yes.
Okay? So what happens when you have a lot of histamine in your brain? You can't go to sleep. And how many people have trouble sleeping these days? So there's other factors involved too, but that's a big part of it. So what happens? What do you do to go and fix this? Well, the interesting thing about it is that there's a large number of foods that produce histamine, and that your body then has also produced histamine. So what the first thing you have to do is figure out what kind of foods you're using that are high histamine and reduce those. So there's a lady by the name of Janice Jonja, Jonja. She's up in British Columbia, and she's written an extensive amount of work on reducing histamine using foods. And basically what it is it's just avoiding. You avoid like lots of wheat, soy, tomatoes, red wine. No, I know you didn't want to hear that. Okay. But those are high histamine foods, so the first thing you want to do is reduce that. The second thing is sometimes your body is so depleted of this stuff called DAO, diamine oxidase, that if you don't go and replenish that, then it's going to be like a long, drawn-out kind of process. So there's actually one company in the whole world that makes diamine oxidase available in pill form. Okay? It's in Austria. But it's sold in this country through something called Umbrellex. Called Umbrellex DAO. Like umbrella with an X on it. Okay? So in my practice, I use a lot of Umbrellex. I have people taking that to increase their DAO levels, decrease their histamine levels. And I see people not just with sniffles and with a cough, but I see people with things called mastocytosis. I don't know if anybody knows that term or not, but what it is basically, it's where you have histamine outbreak in your skin all over your body. Okay? And if anybody has ever had a mosquito bite, they know that histamine itches. Okay, that's one of the things it does. So can you imagine like your whole body being covered with something that itches? And it's very hard to control. So this diamine oxidase I was telling you about, that's the one way you can actually bring it under control and make it work better. Okay? Because that's a really serious problem. Speaking of serious, anybody ever heard of anaphylaxis?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's another histamine problem. Okay? And that's a severe reaction to an allergen of some sort, like let's say a peanut or soy or something like that. Or how about our sushi? Huh? Some people would actually react to that. And it has tendency to close their throat down, and that's all swelling. That's the end result of histamine. Just like the mosquito bite. You've got swelling, and you've got histamine, and you've got redness and irritation and inflammation. But, again, histamine's important. It's necessary in order to go and initiate the healing mechanism. Okay. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually buy this product called DAO off the internet. It's called from a company called Umbrellex. You can use that. There are also a large number of biological things that can be used. Number one would be, everybody ever take a look at an orange and peel an orange and look on the inside of the peel, and it has this kind of yellowish, whitish sort of stuff? Okay, that is something called quercetin. Okay? And quercetin is one of the most important things that you can use to go and bring down your histamine levels. So, that's an important thing. All right, so the end result is then, what do you do to really stop this whole process from happening? Okay, and the important thing to know is, do you have any allergies or any food sensitivities? That's the number one thing. This good doctor and I, over here, we practice the same technique. It's that really hard word, you know, that it's called Nambudrapat's Allergy Elimination Technique. We call it NAET because nobody pronounces Nambudrapat very well the first time. But anyhow, so we use that technique, but we use that technique to reduce people's allergies and to reduce people's sensitivities, because every time they have an allergic or a sensitivity like that in their gut, you know, something they eat, then it produces huge amounts of histamine. And so what it does is, by eliminating the reaction to that food, then the histamine isn't produced, and the abnormal amount of histamine. Okay? So that's basically the situation here. Let me see if I just missed anything, if you don't mind. Give me just a second. Okay. So another thing you can do too is, besides the foods, there's also things called emotional treatments that we use with NAET. And histamine, believe it or not, is also generated in the brain. And it's controlled by a different chemical, not DAO, but a different one. And that histamine can be produced as a reaction, an emotional response too. And it goes along with cortisol. Probably everybody knows that term, cortisol. That's like your stress hormone, right? And it reacts to that. And you can actually treat that and by reducing the emotional response to different things. So there's lots of different ways to go and reduce this. If anybody knows of anybody that has any issues with histamine, okay, like not just this cold or whatever it is that you're having over there, but you know, any kind of problem where people are having continuous coughing or food upset, food interest, things like that, then we can deal with that and reduce the histamine load. So I was just wondering if anybody has any questions. Yes, sir.
Does exercise have any impact on any of that or no?
It does, because there are actually some people that are allergic to lactic acid, which is generated by the muscles. And so when you go ahead and do that, your body will produce histamine also with exercise. So sometimes actually people will react to the chemical plus the histamine from the muscle use. Yeah. Did you come?
I did.
Yes.
You talked about the treatment, the method.
Yes.
And I didn't quite catch what the method was.
Okay, it's called NAET, or Nambudrapat's Allergy Elimination Technique. And it's really quite simple. It's based on the principles of acupuncture. I'm not an acupuncturist, this gentleman is. But it uses the principles from acupuncture. We do like an acupressure kind of treatment on people, and while they're holding a particular substance that they're reacting to. And what that does is that eliminates their response, their negative response to whatever that substance is. So by doing that, we also reduce the histamine load too.
So you have a problem with tomatoes, you can make it
Yeah.
so you don't have a problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
So did I hear right that there's a relationship between histamine levels and if you're lactose intolerant?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, milk is one of the top foods that have histamine. I mean, it's the number one food that has histamine in it, milk. Okay. So you've got a dose of histamine coming from the milk, but then now you've got the reaction to the lactose that produces even more histamine. So now you got like you're fully loaded with histamine because of that. And so yeah, lactose intolerance is actually quite simple to fix. I had one lady in my office, for example, that she had lactose intolerance for 60 years. And we did one treatment on her for lactose. And after that, she never had another trouble drinking. She never drank milk prior to that time, but after that, she didn't have any milk problems at all. Yeah. Yes?
Actually, I think what I had was bronchitis, and I didn't see the doctor at first,
Yeah.
because I was always told when you take medication that kills your autoimmune system. However, the last couple of days, my husband made me go.
Yeah.
So I probably had it longer than I should have.
Yeah, you probably did. But
But is that true that
Usually,
Medicine from the doctors kills your autoimmune system?
no, not really. No, I mean, you develop autoimmune problems from an escalated, usually an infection, from starters, and then it just escalates into more and more things. That's usually what produces autoimmune problems. And there's an allergy component to that as well. But basically, you might want to consider just consuming some vitamin A and D. Like I would go with 20, would you recommend like 20,000 units of vitamin A and about 10,000 vitamin D? That's specific for your lungs and kidneys. And in Chinese medicine, I think they're on the same circuit basically, aren't they? The lung and kidney response, yeah. Anyhow, but that would also, what you're experiencing there is you're experiencing your body's producing mucus to try to calm down the histamine response you got going on in there. And that's why you got the cough. Yeah, that's a pretty good cough too in my head. You've developed that really well.
Yeah.
All right.
One of the things that I was very amused to find out about is you hear about allergies and you always think it's food related or environmentally related, but it's also, it can be caused by emotional things, it can be caused by temperature, too cold or too hot, the sun, different things like that that affect the allergies. So
Yeah,
can you say a word or two about that?
Yes, thank you. You know, if you went to a conventional allergist, what they would do is they would do probably a skin prick test. So that test, by the way, in the discoloration that happens in the skin is due to histamine. So they're actually testing your histamine response too. Where am I? I can't read that.
Oh, it's just red.
Oh, are we over? Well, okay.
That's okay, go on, finish.
Okay. All right. So, so yeah, you can have a negative response to anything. I've had a number of people in the office, for example, that are exposed to sunlight. They would get like just a small amount of sun on their feet, you know, from wearing sandals, and they would produce histamine. It would make their feet swell. Lots of things like that. And so that's easily fixed. I mentioned about the emotional thing. That happens a lot. You know, people get into stressful situations in their life. What that does is that sets up a continuum of issues between cortisol and insulin and a whole bunch of other things, including histamine, by the way. And what happens is that when they, you know, when you have to take care of that, or they'll keep responding like that, even on an unconscious level. The good doctor here mentioned Landmark. Okay, I've done Landmark too. And one of the good things about Landmark is that you actually have to go back and address the thing that you've been trying to avoid for so long, right? Isn't that true? Yeah. So it's kind of like a self-treatment, emotional treatment, you know, in that regard. And what was, the cold? I had one lady come in, for example, that grew up in Ohio, and whenever the temperature dropped below 60 degrees, she would literally get chilled to the bone. I mean, she could not go out or do anything. And that was because when she was a kid, she used to have to walk to school, and one time, there was this one time when it was like below freezing, and she got frostbite. And she almost lost her toes. But that was okay, but from that point on, she'd always been allergic to cold. So what we did was we had them hold an ice cube, and we do a little something called a muscle response test. And the muscle response test showed she was allergic to cold. So then what we did was this treatment I was telling you about, it's like an acupressure kind of treatment, and solved the reaction to that. From that point on, she never had another problem with cold.
Can you tell us some of your weird, crazy story cases that sticks in your mind?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you one really weird one. Okay, this was as weird as they got. So I had this lady come in. She had been literally to every hospital, you know, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo, down in San Diego, in La Jolla. What is it? Scripps, yeah, Scripps. She'd been everywhere, and nobody could figure out what was going on. She had this whole list of symptoms that she had. So I decided to just go ahead and check out everything I had. I got we use little vials that have different substances in them. And one of the substances we had was actually made from what's called brucellosis. Now, nobody ever remembers brucellosis, but it was the reason that they started pasteurizing milk. It used to be called milkmaid's fever. okay? So I checked around on 3,000 things, didn't find one thing wrong except the one thing, brucellosis. And I said to her, I said, this is like really weird, I've never had this experience before, but, you know, because they started pasteurizing milk in the early 1900s, and, you know, that pretty well wiped out brucellosis. I says, that's the only thing I found on you. And she looked me in the eye and she said, my grandfather died of brucellosis. Wow. And so we treated her on brucellosis, and all of her symptoms went away. The very next day, they were like totally gone. So that was about the weirdest one I've ever seen. Huh? How did you what?
How did she get it?
How did she get it? You ever heard of epigenetic stress? Have you ever heard that term? It's a new term that it basically is, it's only about 10 years old, but it's a term that's applied to generational. You can have what we call generational stress. It's actually not genetic per se, it's not in the genes, but it's handed down as part of the process called methylation in the genes. So it's genetic, but it's not gene, okay? So what happened was that, yeah, this was handed down through her multiple generations, okay? So, and you know, it was an emotional thing because otherwise if he had died and she was in the direct lineage from there, she wouldn't have been around, right? Okay, so it was emotional, but it wasn't physical. It wasn't a physical thing.
Dr. Erkfritz, could you answer questions one after the meeting?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry I went over.
So I'd just like to thank Dr. Erkfritz. I said at the beginning of the meeting that the wonderful thing about not having to wait for our school days to learn stuff is that coming to Toastmasters, I learned so many things. And Dr. Erkfritz, that was just really, really